One of the most difficult spots you will find yourself in at the poker table is when you raise before the flop and then someone in position calls you. This is a situation that many people mess up. And in today's episode of Mastering GTO, we are going to cover that exact spot by going through a real life hand that a lot of people would play very poorly. And then we're going to go through the GTO library on peakgto.com to explain and show how to play all sorts of situations where you raise and then someone calls in position against you. And then finally, we're going to drill ourselves using Peak GTO to make sure we fully understand how to play this situation so we navigate it well in the future. Here is the situation we're going to be looking at today. 50 big blinds deep. We're in the low jack seat. We raise it with queen, jack of spades. The button calls. The blinds fold, and we see the flop heads up. The flop comes 10, 7, 3. Okay? This is a situation right off the bat where you have to recognize that you need to check some portion of the time, especially when you do not have a whole lot of combinations of top pair in your range. Now, this spot's actually a little bit unique in that we do have ace 10 offsuit, king 10 offsuit, queen 10 offsuit, jack 10 offsuit perhaps. So we have a lot of 10x in our range, which is going to allow us to bet somewhat often. Now, what a lot of people do wrong here is they bet every time using a small size. They think I raise preflop, I should make a small continuation bet and go from there. But that is very, very incorrect. And in fact, you're going to want to make a large bet when you do bet on this somewhat dynamic board. Anytime there are 2 to a straight or 2 to a flush on the board, but not a flush or straight yet, typically, not always, but typically you're going to want to bet using a large size when you do bet with a somewhat polarized range. And this time, because we have a lot of 10x in our range, we are going to get to bet somewhat often. So we go for a 4,500 bet and we get called. When you bet big on the flop and get called, your opponent's range is going to tighten up substantially. So on this turn 6 of hearts, you want to consider who has more very strong hands in their range at this point. And while we do certainly have aces, kings, queens, jacks, 10s, 7s, ace 10, king 10, queen 10, jack 10, we also have a whole lot of trash like king, queen, king, jack, queen, jack, king 9 suited, etc. So here we want to be very selective with the bluffs we use at this point. A lot of players would bet the flop with this queen jack correctly, using a large size correctly, but then automatically triple barrel it off, thinking queen high is one of the worst hands we can have. Let's run the bluff. But from out of position when you bluff, you almost always want to have decent equity to bluff. And that's probably going to mean flush draws and hands with a 9 or an 8 or a 5 or a 4 if you happen to have those. So here, even though we have queen high, the plan is just to check. And we're probably just going to check and lose. Here on the river, we have almost no 4s in our range. Our opponent doesn't have very many either, but they also are going to have a whole lot of top pairs. This is another spot where it may be very tempting to bluff. And look, bluffing probably isn't horrible in this spot, but the right play is to simply check and fold. Feels weak, feels tight, feels nitty, but that is the right play. So here I pulled up this situation in Peak GTO. We raised to 2.2 big blinds in the low jack seat. With this range, notice we do have various hands with an 8 or, if we go back to the spot, a 9 that will be used to bluff, I am sure. And we do have various 10x in our range. You may opt to raise all combinations of these 10x in our range. We have lots of suited 10s in our range. All right, the button's going to call with the range in green. Now, of course, your opponent may play very differently than this. Maybe they 3-bet very linearly with only the best hands, which is going to make their calling range even weaker. Maybe they call far more often with a whole lot of junky stuff. But notice, if they're playing well, and again, your opponents may not be playing well, they don't really have king 10, queen 10, and jack 10 in their range all that often. And that is worth noting, right? Because those are decently strong hands on the flop, which is going to allow us to get to the flop of 10, 7, 3. And as you can see, we're actually going to bet this flop a decent amount of the time. And if you look at the hands that really like to bet, it's a lot of our 10x, it's almost always good, right? Better hands, like overpairs, etc. And let's call them draws with stuff like king, queen, king, jack, queen, king 9, queen 9, jack 9, king 8, queen 8, jack 8, stuff like that, right? We're also betting with various backdoor flush draws. Notice if we have ace 4 of hearts, diamonds, or spades, we bet it decently often. But if we have ace 4 of clubs, we don't bet it decently often. And a general rule that you will find that is almost always true is when you are out of position, your hands that really don't have a whole lot of potential don't do a whole lot of betting. So we see ace 5 of clubs, just checking and giving up. King 5 of clubs, checking and giving up. Ace 8 of clubs, same story, right? These hands that have no backdoor flush draw and just a junky backdoor straight draw are simply not putting money in the pot. Now, our queen jack is going to bet decently often. We see a similar rule here, right? Queen jack of clubs is not betting nearly as often as queen jack of spades, diamonds, and hearts, but we do go for the big bet. And when we get called, notice the opponent's range is going to tighten up substantially. They're folding out 30% of the time, which means their range is going to get somewhat strong. Notice, by the way, when we do bet big, the opponent should not raise very often. I know this is not an in-position video, but something a lot of people do wrong is they raise top pairs on the flops like this. And as we can see, that would be a very big mistake because you really don't do much raising at all against a big bet. All right, say they do call, and the turn's the 6 of hearts. That is correct. Now we have to check a ton. And like I said, on the turn, the bluffs we're going to use are going to be generally high equity bluffs. From out of position, your bluffs need to come from high equity hands. That's not the case when you're in position, but from out of position, it's almost always the case. And we see king jack of hearts, king queen of hearts, queen jack of hearts, king 9, king 8, right, with the straight draws, jack 9, jack 8. These are the hands that are much preferring to bet over a hand like queen jack of spades or king jack of spades or king queen of spades. These are simply checking and giving up. Notice we are getting to bluff with various gut shots, right? So some bluffs with hands containing a 5 and a 4 and a 9 and an 8, but not the other hands. So we check, and the opponent's going to bet or check sometimes. They check half the time in the spot. Then the river was a 4 of whatever, or 3 of whatever, doesn't really matter. In this scenario, our queen jack is still just giving up, okay? And with our particular hand, queen jack of spades, and also queen jack of diamonds in this instance, and if we had queen jack of hearts, we would be checking. Whereas if we have the clubs, we're actually going for a bluff. Now you may say, why in the world would you bet queen jack of clubs, but not spades, hearts, or diamonds? It's because when you have queen jack of clubs, it's more likely that your opponent has a hand like king jack of spades that will fold to a bet, right? When you have clubs, though, it's more likely your opponent has, or when you have spades, diamonds, or hearts in your hand, it's less likely they have those hands that will then fold, right? The hands you're trying to get to fold, like ace high, king high, queen high, etc., are taken out of your opponent's range when you have the hearts, diamonds, or spades, but not so much when you have the clubs. So that is how we're going to play this spot. But what I really want to focus on is the flop. The flop is the spot where a lot of people mess up. Also, something that's very important. When we raise the low jack, our range is pretty good, right? Say instead we raise from the cutoff with a much wider range. All right? Say we raise the cutoff and the button calls and the blinds fold and it comes the same 10-7-3. Now we're going to check far more often, despite having top pairs in our range. Why is that? Well, it's because we have far more junk in our range as well. So notice we are now checking far more often on the flop if we raise from the cutoff and the button called. Okay? And as you see, we're still using the big size of, call it 2/3 pot, but we're just going to be way more polarized in general with our best hands and those same logical draws, right? Whereas a lot of the ace high stuff, king high stuff, again, the hands that just have no potential, like queen 5 of clubs, queen 4 of clubs, king 6 of clubs, all of these are still just very clear checks and give ups. Now, let's take a look at another spot. Say instead we raise the low jack seat back with this decently strong range and the button calls, the blinds fold, and now let's say the flop comes 9-7-3. Okay? May look very similar, but it's not. Notice again, we are checking far more often in this scenario compared to the previous scenario. Say the flop was instead 7-5-3. Now we're checking even more often. Say the flop comes 6-5-3. Checking even more often, right? Getting close to every time. And say the flop is 5-4-3. We're checking every single time. And that's because on 5-4-3, notice we just have a whole lot of garbage, right? And also a whole lot of hands that don't have a whole lot of potential. And that forces us to check a ton of the time in this situation on the low card boards. And this is a very, very common rule that you will see play out over and over and over again. If you want to make this spot even more extreme, say we raise the cutoff and the button calls, and the flop comes 9-7-3. We're going to be doing a decent amount of checking. If we make it lower and lower, say 7-4-3, a decent amount of checking, but we do get to have some bets because we still have some strong hands, right, due to this type of board. Say it comes 5-4-3. Again, a whole lot of checking, right? So make it 5-4-3. All different suits, still a lot of checking, but a small amount of bets, but a lot of checking. So what I'm trying to say here is when you are out of position on the flop, as the board gets worse and worse and worse for your range, and especially as you don't have very many offsuit top pairs, meaning you just have this chunk of your range, king, queen, king, jack, queen 10, jack 10, 10, 9, that's just total garbage. You have to do a lot of checking. And this is exactly what most people do not do. Most people in the spot continuation bet every single time because they think, I have all the overpairs. That's great. So they bet every single time. And that is a mistake. If you do check, by the way, and your opponent makes a bet, when they do bet, they're going to bet medium or small. Say they do go for the 2/3 pot size bet. You're going to put in some check raises. This feels a little bit uncomfortable to a lot of people, but typically the hands you want to check raise are going to be your best top pairs that are vulnerable to being outdrawn, and then draws. And from out of position, those are usually going to be high equity draws, such as straight draws if there's no flush draw on the board. So we see here like 9-7 and 9-6 for a hand that has no showdown value but a draw going for the raise. We also see jacks, 10s, 9s, 7s, 6s going for the check raise because those are almost always good but vulnerable. If we look at another spot instead of, let's look at the 10-7-3 if we checked from out of position and the opponent goes for a bet, say they use the big bet, we're check raising a similar range, right? Here would be over pairs, aces, kings, queens, jacks, some top pairs, right? And then draws. Now, what are draws on 10-7-3? We have stuff like queen, jack. That's a hand that has lots of backdoor potential. If we turn a straight card or a flush card, we can easily continue betting, and we go from there. We're also check raising stuff like ace high, which may seem a little bit weird because ace high normally has showdown value, but ace 5 and ace 4 and ace 6 of hearts, spades, and diamonds has a lot of good turn cards it can turn. Plus, if you turn top pair, it's usually very, very good. Now, you can't go overboard and check raise every junky draw like king X suited and queen X suited because then you'd be check raising far too often. But that's going to be the play in this spot. Now, if the opponent instead bets small on the flop, we're going to be check raising more often. When your opponent bets using a small size, you basically always check raise more often with the same similar selection of hands. Notice here we have more king, queen, and king jack, and queen jack going for the check raise. And we actually see queen jack of spades check raise every single time when you opt to check it against their small bet. As they bet smaller and smaller, from out of position, you check raise more and more often. And by the way, if they do bet something like 1.7 big blinds, you're going big. You're going to 9.9 big blinds or 10 big blinds, right? You want to put pressure on all of your opponent's marginal hands that bet in that situation. So that's generally how we play this spot. And what I want to do now is I want to go through the Peak GTO trainer. Here we're playing a tournament. All these scenarios are what we're doing. Pre-flop, we're starting pre-flop, raise first in. We can actually select hands will be dealt. So we're dealt decent hands to begin with. Let's just be dealt this range. And we could select specific boards. We're going to be in the low jack against the button. Let's start the hand. Ace 8 suited. Oh, my buttons are slightly off the screen. Tell you what, we'll just pull it down here like this. All right, we raise it up. Player on the button is going to be forced to call us, and the flop comes 9-5-2. All right, already a dicey spot. I have to presume we should do a lot of checking on this board. You want to go through here and take a look at what the solver would do in this spot while we're here. Say it is 9-5-2. 9-5-2. In this spot, we're going to do a lot of checking, like I said. And if we are going to bet, it's going to be with flush draws, high equity draws, and backdoor draws as well. But ace 8, like we have, doesn't actually need to bet all that often because ace 8 can reasonably check and call. Imagine we do check and the opponent uses a small bet. Ace 8 with a diamond can very easily call, as we see here. Okay, and this just goes back to just studying these rules over and over and over again so that you can understand why the solver does what it does. We have a gigantic tournament masterclass at pokercoaching.com. Make sure you check it out. All right, check. Should we bet this turn? Interesting turn card because we have a hand that can, again, very easily check and call. If we bet, we do get some hands with equity to fold. I would presume we're going to want to check here, but betting could certainly be fine. And in the real world, I'm like A-okay with betting because I think most people aren't going to raise anywhere near often enough. Let's check it though. We are checking 91% of the time, as you see. I would be more inclined to bet, by the way, if I had a lower flush draw, like say I had queen, jack of diamonds. Let's actually explore that real quick. So on the flop, it went check, check, turns to 3 of diamonds. I want to propose the question, would I be way more inclined to bet queen, jack of diamonds than ace, 8 of diamonds? And as you see here, queen, jack of diamonds bets every single time pretty much. Why is that? Well, it's because queen, jack of diamonds can get better hands to fold, right? When you bet queen, jack on the turn, look, they're going to be folding out ace highs and king highs, right? Which is very beneficial. But whenever you bet ace 8, they're not really folding too many hands that are better than yours, and they're mainly folding hands that are worse than yours, which is why hands like ace 8 of diamonds are mostly going to check in this spot. So facing the big bet, I presume just call. I don't think we want to raise here ever, and notice call is used every single time. We can go through here and confirm what we do want to check raise with in the spot against a chunky bet, and it's going to be not a lot. Notice we are check raising ace 5, ace 4 for the nuts, some ace 3, which is essentially being used as a bluff, over pairs if we have them, and top pair, top kicker, right? And sets. Really not a lot of check raising here. If we did happen to check a low diamond hand, like queen 8 of diamonds, jack 8 of diamonds, 10 8 of diamonds, those are check raising, which again makes a lot of sense because they lack showdown value, whereas the ace 8 does not. River king of diamonds, do we donk lead? Oh my goodness. There really aren't a whole lot of spots to donk lead when you check and call a big turn bet, so I'm going to presume we check, but this might actually be one of them. All right, check 98% of the time. Glad we didn't donk lead. All right, we check. If they bet, of course, we're going to shove. And notice here, if we would have played this hand differently, if we just like bet the flop, it could have gone horribly worse, right? If we bet the turn, it could have gone horribly worse. And this is why studying these common GTO spots is going to go a long way to helping you get a lot better at poker. Here we got a 3-bet hand. I should have forced the opponent to just call. We'll call and see the flop, although now we're kind of in uncharted territory where we're going to be check folding a lot. Ace 2-2, we'll check. We could have set up the trainer to force it to not 3-bet us pre-flop. Facing the small bet, we got a call on the flop with backdoor flush draw, backdoor straight draw. Definitely a dicey scenario, but this is just an easy hand to check and fold on most turns. Now we turn a full house, which is kind of unfortunate. I presume we have to call a turn bet. They did not bet the turn. Now do we bet tiny on the river? I'm going to presume no, but I could certainly be convinced a small bet is ideal in this situation because they're going to have a lot of king high. I'm going to go with the check, but I could be convinced small is better. All right, check every time. Fine. You can actually go through and explore these situations if you feel inclined in the library very easily if you do want to go study them in the future. Ace 8 offsuit. Fold. Not good enough. Ace 7 suited. We'll raise it again. Gosh, we get 3-bet again. Trying to not get 3-bet spots, but here we are. Sometimes that's how it goes. Here we flop nothing. Remember, out of position with nothing, you're just done. You're just done. Don't get fancy. Check and fold. It's okay. It is okay. Queen jack offsuit. We'll raise it up. Please don't 3-bet me. Oh my God, they had him fold sometime for some reason. Ace queen suited. We'll raise it up. We'll play a few more hands, then we'll call it a day. We get called. All right, king, queen, 6. Now, king high boards are usually pretty good for initial raiser, but we have a hand that I think doesn't really love betting. Oh, man, oh, man. I could be convinced check or bet. Small or medium is all fine in this situation. Let's actually take a look in this trainer, see what it does in general in this spot. Say it does come king, queen, 6. King, queen, 6. You're going to bet frequently. The question is does this hand want to bet small or big? And I was thinking in the spot we may want to use a decent amount of big bets, but it looks like we are using the small bet with the king, queen. Oh, obviously the king, queen. Say it was king, queen, 6 with a flush draw. Would that change anything? Notice now we check far more often. Typically when the board has more draws, you bet less often and more polarized. And now the king, queen is doing a decent amount of checking. Anyway, small bet. In this situation. In the real world, I think it might be easier, called the easy play, to simply check and call a bet there. That's a very, very easy spot to play if you check and call, whereas if you bet and get raised, it gets pretty dicey. So as your opponent's more inclined to raise in the real world, maybe you don't necessarily want to go there. Whereas if you can check, just check, call down, and never fold. All right. Against aggressive people, of course. Against super nits, maybe you can fold by the river. Jack 10-2. I think this is a hand that can benefit from betting in terms of size. I think we may want to go bigger in this spot. I could be convinced either way. I do think it's a hand that probably wants to bet a decent chunk of the time. Again, from out of position, you have to be very careful to not overdo it with low equity hands. So we are going to make a guess here. I'm not exactly sure what we should do with this hand. Let's go for the small bet. And it is mixing all three plays, which is hard to implement in the real world. It did err towards the big bet, though, which is important to see, right? And again, if we go over here and just type in Jack 10-2, or whatever it is. Yeah, Jack 10-2. Notice these hands that have some backdoor draws are betting most of the time, and they're using a mixed strategy. I don't think you need to get too bogged down in trying to mix sizes in this situation. What you really want to make a point to figure out, though, is it mostly betting or checking? And if it's betting the vast majority of the time, you probably want to do that. And here, I was considering like what I do if I had like ace X, right? And we notice ace X is checking far more often than king X, because king X lacks showdown value, right? But it can turn some equity. So anyway, once we bet and get raised, we of course just get out of the way. So that's going to be it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you learned how to play out of position when you raise and someone calls. If you want to continue studying these spots, please do yourself a favor and check out peakgto.com. This is going to go a long way to helping you get better at this very common spot that most people mess up. Studying these spots and training in the Peak GTO trainer is going to really, really, really help you get good at poker quickly. Good luck in your games. Have fun. If you enjoyed the video, before you leave, click the like and subscribe button down there. Click the notification bell. I'll talk to you next time.